Well, good evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Technology is fabulous when it works. So I can start that sentence and each one of you can end it when it works. Well, good evening. My name is Ophelia Wellington, and I'm the director of Freetown Village. And for those of you who don't know much about Freetown Village, we are a living history museum. And our mission is to educate the public about African-American history and culture. Since 1982, we have traversed Indiana and the Midwest, reaching 80 of our 92 Indiana counties with at least one of our programs, including all of the contiguous Midwestern states. Freetown has over 15 different kinds of programs. The one you will see tonight is just one of them. Tonight is the 9th in a series of our new programs and program format that extends our mission to educate the public about African-American history and culture. We have some distinguished educators, researchers, professors, and historians who have agreed to share their years of research and to help us to better understand the contributions and stories of those who have come before us. Throughout the year, we're learning about indentured servitude in Indiana, Blacks in the military, the Dust Bowl tournaments, Black settlements throughout Indiana, and so much more. You will want to be with us every month so that you can learn a little bit more about our state and the people who have gone before us and some who are here with us. Go to our webpage at freetownvillage.org to see the listings of these sessions and all of the other Freetown Village events, including our annual Making a Difference fundraiser, where we honor 4 local role models who have made an impact on our young campers during our 6-week summer day camp. Now this year, our Making a Difference fundraiser will be on Tuesday, November the 14th, beginning at 6:00 p.m. at the Madam Walker Theater Ballroom. Tickets and more information are available on our website at freetownvillage.org. Now this year, our honorees are Officer Kendall Adams from IMPD, John L. Burks Craig, Minority Health Coalition of Marion County, Jimmy Tic Tac McMillan, Indianapolis Motor Speedway attorney, and Quintella Wright, a retired IPS educator. Now, if you know any of these honorees, surely you will want to be there to support them. And if you can't make it, consider making a contribution on their behalf. Now, I want to thank our sponsors for their support. Of course, without our sponsors, this would not be possible. Our co-sponsor and host this evening, Indiana Landmarks, Black Heritage Preservation Program, and their executive directors here, Eunice Trotter, Indiana Humanities. And I also say Indiana Humanities gave us our very first grant over 40 years ago. The Indianapolis Foundation, a CICF affiliate, Allen Whitehill Clues Foundation, the Indy Arts Council, the Indiana Arts Commission, and our supporters, the IUPUI, Africana Studies Department, and the Joseph Taylor branch of ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And if you would like to support our 40 years of educating the public and support our outreach to reach the next 1 million participants, go to our webpage at freetownvillage.org to make a contribution. And when I say this, I begin to sound like, I hear myself sounding like PBS. You know, you make a contribution, your dollar supports such valuable programs, and they really do. So we do need your support. And tonight is my honor to have Anthony Conley as our next presenter. Now, Anthony is a graduate of Ball State University with a master's degree in history. He is pursuing a doctoral degree from Purdue University, and he has taught several different history classes at Ivy Tech Community College and Purdue University, including 20th century African-American migration. In addition to teaching, he has presented several different history and academic conference presentations. Tonight, Anthony will talk with us about African Americans, Fox Lake, and the natural world in Indiana. After his presentation, we will entertain questions from our audience here. And for those of you who are online, feel free to drop your questions or comments in the chat. We hope to be able to respond to all of your questions during this time we have allocated for this presentation. And in order to continue to bring quality programs like this, we really appreciate you completing a short evaluation. For those of you who are here, there's a QR code there on the table. There will be another one on the screen. And for those of you who are online, you will receive a link. I know. This is a short questionnaire. Short questionnaire. A short questionnaire. A short questionnaire. So, but it's really important to get your feedback about this program. Our funders love this. And when they love it, they give us more money. When they give us more money, we can do more things. So without further delay, I'd like to welcome Anthony Conley.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Ms. Wellington, for that introduction. Thanks, Ms. Trotter, our host for this evening, in Indiana Landmarks. Thanks to you all for attending this evening and for being patient during the delay. And hopefully we'll I'll have some things to say that will generate some interesting and lively discussion afterwards. I want to start off by quickly saying I'm not a sportsman. I'm not a hunter or a fisherman, but I'm researching the project, and we'll get into in a second why I'm doing that. Excuse me. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about African Americans' interactions with the natural world in Indiana during the 20th century. And I came across this topic last school year. I'm a doctoral student at IUPUI, and I was researching Fox Lake for Africana Studies there. And I started asking people around Indianapolis about their knowledge about that important institution. Now, I was surprised at the number of people who either hadn't heard of it or had heard of it, but had not visited it or had not fished or anything there. But I knew these people hunted and fished and camped and hiked and stuff like that. So that gave me an opportunity to expand my research beyond Fox Lake and focus more on a larger Indiana and our interactions with the natural world across the state. The scope of my work, the geographic scope, really centers on residents of Delaware County and Marion County. My time frame, and there's a reason for that, I'm from Delaware County, from Muncie, so I have a lot of connections and research connections there. And I live in Indianapolis and have a lot of research connections there. So those two cities and counties are the main scope of my research, geographically speaking. My time frame encompasses the entire 20th century, but focuses on the post-World War II era from about the 1940s onward, really in and about the 1980s. I concentrate primarily on the blood sports of hunting and fishing, in addition to camping, swimming, boating, hiking, and similar activities. The critical thinking or the critical theory that I use in this research really deals with the question of resistance against oppression, resistance against mundane work, resistance against the dehumanizing work in industrial foundries, factories, etc. Resistance against cultural erosion as a result of migration, resistance against economic oppression, resistance against food insecurity. So all of this research is flowed through this lens of resistance. So we're looking at African Americans' interaction with the natural world through the lens of resistance, okay? And as far as my sources are concerned, I'll be happy to talk about those during the question and answer session. It's just a little too lengthy to go through all of those right now, but anybody has any questions or comments about those, I'll be happy to entertain them. And I'll mention some of those during my presentation. As far as my presentation structure is concerned, for broad context, I'll begin my presentation with a very short introduction of Africans' interactions with water worlds prior to slavery. We'll note the slave era in the United States and Indiana's rural Black settlements. I'll touch on Black migration from the South to Indiana and its impact on cultural retention here in the North, as well as the social climate which awaited migrants here in Indiana. I'll conclude by sharing some initial responses derived from the questionnaire research tool I've used thus far in my research. Now, I believe we'll have a question and comment session afterward, and I think that was concerned. So I look forward to that session, that part of the presentation. We'll start off with a story from my childhood. It seems like everything happens between the ages of 10 and 12, doesn't it? So this happened when I was somewhere between 10 and 12 or so. But this one I think happened more when I was about 12 or 13. It had to do with my grandfather one evening in the summer, instructing me to follow him outside. He had something to show me. And what he had to show me was an introduction into skinning a rabbit, something I had never done before. And there we go. I see the response already. And we went outside and underneath the tree in his backyard, and he already had the rabbit partially cut, right? And so he told me to hold the forelegs up like this, and it was hanging down. And he got some some wire pliers, and he said, hold tight. And I held it, and he just ripped the skin off. And what I remember, two things more than anything else, was first of all, the smell. Now, smell is the most enduring of senses, right? And that's there today. The second thing was just the glistening of the sinew and stuff of the animal's innards, and just the muscles and fibers and everything glistening I almost lost it. And he just started giggling and laughing, that kind of thing. But that was my introduction the first of my introductions into the natural world, and one I never forgot. My grandfather really crossed two realms of 20th century life for African Americans in the 20th century. He was part of the second migration, which really started from the 1940s onward. And he was also part of our interactions with the natural world in this state. He hunted, he fished. He didn't do very much camping and things like that, but he was an avid hunter and fisherman. And so were his sons, and not so much as his grandchildren, although my sister is an avid fisherman. I didn't really take much of that up. But he did introduce us to that important part of his life. I think I got my papers out of line here for a second. Just bear with me just for a minute. Sorry about that. Now I got them turned around there. Okay. Kevin Dawson's important study, Undercurrents of Power, the African Water Worlds, introduces us to African American, or rather Africans' connection to the natural world and also water bodies on the continent. I have a map here that gives us some indication of the various river systems that exist throughout the continent. We know that the vast majority of peoples who were enslaved and brought here to the New World come from Western and West Central Africa, which I have a pointer, but around Syria, around here. And these were people who were intimately connected to the natural world, intimately connected to water bodies. Many of them, their creation stories incorporated animals who inhabited water bodies, crocodiles, snakes, different bird life, fish, etc., were all parts of different cultures' creation stories. Transportation, trade, a source of food, river systems provided all of that for Africans prior to the slave experience here in the New World. These were water people, and they transferred that knowledge here to the New World. During the slave era, I think most of us are familiar with how African-American slaves were connected to the natural world through religious ceremonies, through marriages, through water baptisms, through hunting, fishing, tramping through woods, through escape, etc. There was an intimate connection to the natural world during the slave experience. I think we all are familiar with that. I think I have an image here that kind of highlights that. Unfortunately, my images aren't in order. Whoops, go the other way. And so bear with me as I flip through. Here we have an image dramatizing escape on the Underground Railroad, of course, in the natural world. We can think about Harriet Tubman and her knowledge of woods, etc., and having to negotiate those natural world bodies, helping people escape to freedom. Constance Rourke's important study on the evolution of a uniquely American sense of humor, by that same title, American Humor, and anyone who's interested in comedy and humor in American society would be well served to read Rourke's work on that subject. But American Humor highlights for us Black slaves' presence in the natural world of the Deep South as the cotton industry or the King Cotton starts to move across the Gulf Coast states of Western Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, into parts of Arkansas and Louisiana as well. Black people were there, clearing forests, building dams, draining rivers, rerouting rivers and streams in some cases. We had an ever-present presence in that westward expansion across the Deep South. And part of what Rourke talks about in her work is how in comedy, well, she really identifies 3 stock comedy sources in American humor. The backwoodsman, you know, the Jethro, everybody knows Jethro, Dukes of Hazzard, that character is still with us in the 21st century, right? It stems from the colonial era. The second character is the urban hipster, you know, the Jim Dandy, who the snake oil salesman, who tries to, you know, take the money of the backwoodsman. The third character comes through minstrelsy, and of course through the tradition of blackface minstrelsy. And we all know what that's about. But that art form, in its own way, is one way that Americans dealt with that ugly part of our society, of slavery, etc. And so blackface minstrelsy also plays an important role in the evolution of humor in American society. But Rourke's book reminds us of African Americans' presence in the Deep South as the country starts to move west along the Gulf Coast states with cotton, etc. The slave era tradition of customary rights is highlighted in the text Hunting and Fishing in the New South, Black Labor and White Leisure After the Civil War by Scott Giltner. Among other things, Giltner reminds us or introduces us to this idea of customary rights, whereby slave owners or enslavers granted certain hunting and fishing privileges to their slaves. And after slavery, African Americans expected to engage in those same activities. They met stiff resistance in certain parts of the South as sportsmen from all over the United States started to flock in the post-Civil War South and try to set up regulations to restrict African Americans' access to those natural world bodies, in addition to poor whites as well. Okay. But Giltner's book, again, introduces us to that idea of customary rights and how that plays into our ideas of practices of fishing and hunting after slavery. African-American Hoosiers' interactions with the natural world in 19th century Indiana involved in a political, cultural, and environment which was hostile to their presence. Although Indiana's first two constitutions in 1816 and 1851 prohibited slavery, each document erected harsh restrictions on free persons of color. The 1851 Constitution included the infamous Black Code, which prohibited African Americans from even entering the state and imposing a bond on those already residing there. Pro-slavery migrants, mainly from Kentucky and Tennessee, brought with them potent anti-Black cultural sentiments, which also influenced other legal impositions upon the rights of free Blacks in the state. African Americans began creating rural settlements in Indiana in the early to mid-19th century. These communities formed first in southern Indiana, near the Ohio River boundary with Kentucky, and stretched from Lyle Station in Gibson County in the west to Beck's Mill in Jennings County in the east. A knot of rural communities also developed in east central Indiana. These included Weaver in Grant County, Roberts in Hamilton County, and Greenville, which bracketed kind of Dark County, and I believe Wayne County in Indiana. Society of Friends, or Quakers, Quaker members, many of whom were migrants themselves from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina, were instrumental in these particular communities' formation. Rural Black Hoosiers were rooted in engagements with the natural world. Agricultural families followed the seasonal markers for planting and harvesting. Children regularly spent the day exploring outdoors, tramping through woods and along streams, in addition to performing chores with parents and other adults. Nearby forests and grassy fields offered deer, squirrels, raccoon, possum, rabbits, and bird life. And there's an interesting, I came across an interesting recipe for preparing raccoon in a book entitled, I think it was 100 Years of Negro Cooking by a former Indianapolis resident and a former friend of mine, B. Moulton Foster. I don't know if anybody remembers that name from Indianapolis. She wrote a cookbook. There's just some heads nodding. B was a good friend of my family's. And what I remember from that recipe was one of the initial instructions was first remove the underarm kernel. So, so apparently this critter has some kind of organ that it was critical for people to remove before you did anything else in preparing it for consumption. The underarm kernel. She removed that at all costs. And in all seriousness, I think it had some kind of gland that it emitted some hormones or something. I don't know. I've never seen one. Okay. Thus far. All right. Okay. So yeah, that was something else that they did. So okay, yeah. One is reminded of the impressive church revival picnic, vividly depicted in Ralph Ellison's Juneteenth. I'm gonna take a second if you bear with me. Anyone read Ellison's Juneteenth, his second novel? He didn't finish it before he died. His state executor and his wife finished the text. But it's just one example. I guess everybody has at least one good book in them, and he had Invisible Man in them. And I mean, how can you top that? You know, that was what I think the American Library Association ranked that as the #1 book of fiction in American literature in the 20th century. So I think that says something about the power of Ellison's Invisible Man. But Juneteenth followed, and I won't go too deep into what the story is about, but this part deals with a picnic, a church picnic celebrating the holiday of Juneteenth. And the story is about a Black preacher who adopts a abandoned young white boy, and raises him to be this great white father of African Americans, sort of like a second Abraham Lincoln kind of thing, right? And so they go through different parts of the South as itinerant ministers, little Bliss, the white guy, the white boy following behind him. And so they're reflecting on one of these ceremonies. And the preacher is talking. And the feasting part, you must remember that, Bliss. There were all those ladies turning out fried fish and fried chicken, and Mr. Double Jointed Jackson, the barbecue king, who had come out from Atlanta and was sweating like a Georgia politician on election day. Excuse me, Bliss. Bliss was a politician. Supervising 16 cooks and presiding over barbecue pits all by himself. Think about for a second, Bliss, it'll come to you, because even if you look at it simply from the point of view of eating, it was truly a great occasion. Lord, we ate up 1,500 loaves of sandwich bread, 500 pounds of catfish and snapper, 900 pounds of barbecue ribs, 85 hams directly from Virginia, 50 pounds of potato salad, and a whole big cabbage patch of coleslaw. Yeah, yes. There's something else in there. You got to take my glasses off. And let's not mention the butter beans. No. And don't talk about the fresh young roasted ears and the watermelons, neither the fried pies, chocolate cakes, and homemade ice cream. Lord, but that was a great occasion, a great occasion. And now I don't think we topped anything like that, you know, here in our ceremonies. And this is fiction, but it does speak to how African Americans wove the natural world into their religious expressions, right? These outdoor celebrations that became hallmarks in our cultural expressions. A whole cabbage patch of coleslaw. That's something else. That's very serious, isn't it? Okay. Now I almost lost my spot again. I got to Ellison. As I note, I do, however, think that it would be safe for me to say that Ellison's magnificent festival, that these early Hoosiers and their African ancestors interwove natural world engagements in their religious and spiritual lives that I just mentioned. Okay. Talk a little bit about the Great Migration and cultural retention in the natural world. The Great Migration of the 1910s and 1960s is as important to the study of African American history as are the slave and civil rights periods and the Black Power movement of the 1960s. The mass exodus of nearly 6 million Blacks from the South to the northern and western US reshaped the group's political, economic, and social cultural experiences in communities from Richmond, Indiana to Richmond, California. African Americans transformed themselves from a predominantly rural population to a largely northern and urban one. 90% of Blacks lived in the rural South in 1900. Over 50% of this population resided in non-Southern urban communities by the end of the second migration. That's a major transformation, demographically speaking. Scholars generally divide this historical event into two periods. The first beginning in 1914 with the start of World War I and ending with the stock market crash and the onset of the Great Depression in 1929. The US entry in World War II in 1941 sparked the second period, which culminated after the 1960s. Approximately 1.5 million Blacks left the South during the first period, most heading to cities in the Northeast and Midwest. Indianapolis, Indiana was an important Midwestern destination point during both migrations. The city, since the early 19th century, had attracted Blacks from locales in Indiana and neighboring Ohio, as well as from the upper South states of Kentucky and Tennessee. Mississippi and other deep South states got my stuff mixed up again here. I know I was going to say these Mississippi, Alabama, and other states provided more migrants as the migration progressed during the 1920s. Oh, I see what I did. Okay. During the last migration period, Indianapolis's African-American population grew from just over 15,900 in 1900 to nearly 43,000 by 1930. This total would approach 134,000 by the end of the Second Great Migration in 1970. Cultural retention represented a compelling aspect of African-American migration from the rural South to the urban North. As migrants adjusted to the city, they looked for opportunities to perpetuate aspects of their lives on farms and in small towns in the South. Part of this interest was the quest for new natural world spaces for recreation and leisure. New urbanites sought out safe outdoor spaces for late summer tent revivals, community picnics, baseball games, and other expressions of outdoor life. Richard Wright's powerful short story, Big Boy Leaves Home, one of my favorite short stories, features a richly described snippet of a group of young African-American boys goofing around on a hot day near an inviting but off-limits pond in Depression-era Mississippi before tragedy strikes. And if anyone's ever, if someone familiar with Richard Wright, I strongly encourage you to read Big Boy Leaves Home, a very moving short story about migration, Southern life, youth life in the South, et cetera, and racial violence. Wish we could turn the lights up just a little bit. That's okay, I'm working on it. Okay. Migrants also sought out spaces for the blood sports of hunting, trapping, and fishing, activities which figured largely in the lives of rural Black Southerners. Black's blood sport engagements often extended beyond the realm of recreation and leisure. They also represented expressions of independence and self-reliance. Other migrants sought engagements with the natural world through less violent excursions like camping, swimming, running hunting dogs, foraging, and extended country jaunts. Migrants also desired outdoor spaces which offered unique opportunities for family-centered recreation and leisure. In the early 1920s, some African Americans from Indianapolis, Gary, Fort Wayne, and other Indiana cities, as well as from urban areas in Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan, sought out resort-like spaces which featured extended lodging, leisurely social events, and outdoor recreation. Idlewild in Michigan and Chicken Bone Beach in Atlantic City, New Jersey, were two examples of such spaces familiar to post-war Hoosiers. Outdoor recreational sites, which cater to African Americans, enhance Black Hoosiers' sense of security by operating as havens for resentful whites and the accompanying and irritating white gawk. Should have stapled them together. Now, founding of Fox Lake. African-American Hoosiers' quest for natural world environs sparked Fox Lake's resort's creation as a safe space in the state. Ice age glaciation created across northern Indiana scores of natural water bodies, which attracted avid sportsmen and occasional camping families alike. The region includes well over 200 water bodies and lakes. The largest, Lake Wawasee, measures 3,400 acres, while the deepest, the 850-acre Tippecanoe Lake, dives to a depth of 123 feet. Permanent sites featuring residential cottages and camping grounds, gathering halls, and organized outdoor activities sprang up around these areas. Post-World War I Americans were eager to explore their own country's outdoor wonders and enjoy the blessings of liberty, further secured after vanquishing authoritarianism on the battlefields of Europe. Americans' growing interest in the outdoors also reflected changing consumer habits during the 1920s. As Ann Douglas notes in Terrible Honesty, Mongrel Manhattan in the 1920s, an increasing sliver of this change, for some portions of white America at least, centered on the intersection between leisure and sun tanning. Sun-darkened complexions, prior to the 1920s, the redneck symbolized or signified outdoor labor, et cetera. After during the 1920s and beyond, darker skin signified sophistication, cosmopolitanism, health, fitness, et cetera. Sun lamps made their introduction into America during this period. Most white Americans, of course, were not international jet setters who sunned at luxurious exotic resorts. They could, however, travel with their families in their own automobiles and spend time at sun-splashed campgrounds and parks on fishing excursions along rivers, lakes, and streams all around the country. And they could join myriad other white Hoosiers who flocked to these states' natural spaces in search of escape from the confines of modern urban living and the simple routine of small town Indiana. These natural world spaces rejected African-American visitors. While Black migrants to Indianapolis found comparatively greater economic and educational opportunities, vibrant religious and entertainment cultures, and a broad range of accessible social services that they might have enjoyed in the South, they also entered a state gripped by nativism, xenophobia, and racial hostility. Negative sentiments targeting Catholics and Jewish immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and Black Southern migrants spread across post-war Indiana. The spirit permeated the state's political, economic, and social institutions. Immigration is imperiling America. Whoops. Immigration is imperiling America, screamed a headline from the February 21st, 1923 edition of the Ku Klux Klan organ, The Fiery Cross, published right here in Indianapolis. Negrophobia remained a cornerstone of racial and ethnic hostility in the state. The colors are becoming too thick, complained one white Indianapolis resident as the Great Migration reshaped the capital city's population. Nighttime Klan ceremonies and broad daylight marches were performed in various Indiana communities. At Gannett Records, a recording studio in Richmond, Klansmen recorded musical sides and promotional presents for distribution. A mid-decade estimate of the group's Indiana membership placed the number at approximately 166,000, with a greater concentration of pockets in northern Indiana. Photographer W.A. Swift's collection of photographs depicting daily life in 1920s Muncie includes numerous images of KKK activity in Middletown and other parts of Delaware County. Some communities developed reputations as Sundown-Towns, spaces both inhospitable and threatening to Black Hoosiers after the workday was completed. James Lowen's Sundown-Towns, A Hidden Dimension of American Racism, examines this phenomenon's evolution in Indiana and other states. Fox Lake's opening in the mid-1920s may be seen as an example of success in African Americans' quest to access the natural world in Indiana, as well as an example of racial discrimination in the state. Groups of Black prospective land buyers from the Chicago-Gary region and from Fort Wayne had tried unsuccessfully to acquire natural world space for recreational use in northern Indiana. White landowners simply refused to sell to them. Other whites were more enterprising. The Indiana Historical Society's holdings includes a document titled Fox Lake History, and I think I have that, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. Fox Lake's history, 1925 to 1965, which chronicles the resort's development. In 1924, a group of white men from Fort Wayne, Marion, and Kokomo formed the Fox Lake Land Company, purchased land and developed land along Fox Lake's south shore and marketed the lots and cottages to African Americans. Among the initial Black supporters of the venture were Carl and Mamie Wilson from Fort Wayne. Also in the Historical Society's collections is a 1926 flyer which advertised a bus excursion from Indianapolis to Fox Lake. And I think I have that. We can get to it. Oh, whoops. And there is the image of the 1926 advertisement, drumming up support for African Americans to start to visit and build cottages and make Fox Lake a part of their lives. Which is interesting to me is the part about, for those who wanted to travel by car, drive their own cars, it gives you some instructions, and I can imagine that was a Homeric odyssey, driving on some of those roads from Indianapolis to and just outside of Angola, Indiana, in 1926. Before the interstate system, and just a couple of other images associated with that. Whoops. It's a gentleman, a young guy. Some of you might recognize some of these people fishing at Fox Lake, excuse me. See each other. I think I had some more. Those were the two main ones I had. Yeah. That's the home of Freeman Ransom, who along with Madam C.J. Walker were early supporters of Fox Lake. It's the image of, oh, that's a different image. That one, my man is shaking his head like, no, that wasn't there. Okay. Let's press on. The advertisement includes, as I noted, directions for persons who wish to drive their own vehicles to the site. A choice fraught with potentially unsavory consequences, as recollected by African-American travelers in Gretchen Soren's Driving While Black. Some of you might have seen the documentary by that same title. And I believe there was a motion picture by that title as well. In 1928, the Wilsons built the first cottage on the site and ushered in a period of Black occupancy, which has remained constant today. African Americans from other cities and towns in Indiana, a list of which at this time includes African Americans from other cities and towns in Indiana, also supported Fox Lake. And this list also at one time also included Indianapolis's Madam C.J. Walker and Ransom, as we just saw. Fox Lake offered African Americans access to and ownership and management of a portion of natural world Indiana. Residents and visitors enjoyed water sports and fishing, hiking and camping, in addition to musical and social engagements. A property owners association formed in the 1930s managed the resort's operations and planned activities. Families and friends renewed connections and established new ones. People planned future hunting and fishing adventures. Some underdog kid won this year's swimming competition. Mr. You-know-who won the first prize in the fishing competition. These kinds of things, all away from the peering eyes of white co-workers, supervisors, and bill collectors. Fox Lake served not only as a refuge from the peering eyes, I already talked about that. Fox Lake not only served as a refuge from the draining effects of urban living and structural racial discrimination, It also represented successful resistance to that very discrimination. Although African Americans were prevented from acquiring land in northern Indiana in the early 1920s, and some white guys saw a market and took advantage of it, African Americans took advantage of that market and later on and went on to create a very important institution in African American history in this state. Another institution which exemplifies the institutionalization of African American Hoosiers' interaction with the natural world is the Dirty Dozen Hunting and Fishing Club. Founded by a group of avid African American outdoor sportsmen, Dirty Dozen's members have traversed across Indiana on innumerable fishing and hunting excursions. Their journeys also have taken them from Alaska to the Caribbean. The group also created the Outdoor Youth and Exploration Academy, also known as OYEA. OYEA's programming introduces local youth to conservation and environmentalism, in addition to teaching them archery, basic fishing skills, and firearm safety. Lord knows we need that part these days. And if I'm not mistaken, Indiana's first Black Department of DOE, Department of Environment, Department of Natural Resources, I think it is, was a graduate of Dirty Dozen programming or OYEA programming. The Dirty Dozen Hunting and Fishing Club represents a transition in the intersection between African Americans and natural world Indiana. The group's older members began their adult age sporting careers in the 1940s and 1950s. Or actually 1950s, 1960s. The heyday of the modern civil rights movement, when more African Americans began to gain employment in Indiana's industrial factories and shops. Some even managed to secure skilled trades and managerial positions. Still others became active in local labor unions. One of the key factors of opening up African American Hoosiers' natural world interactions was the interracial interactions which occurred during or through industrial employment. Many of the workers were Southerners and had their home states in common. Others shared veteran status. Still others simply worked together and learned of common interests. Their children attended the same schools, competed on the same athletic teams, and were drafted together to serve in Vietnam. There's a white man named John who was an acquaintance of my grandfather. I believe they worked together at Broadwicks, where I know my grandfather worked, in Muncie. This was in the very early 1970s. Sometimes when I was playing outside, I'd see Mr. John drive up and I'd run into the house to tell Grandpa. The two transplanted rural Southerners would talk and smoke cigarettes, which they lit with beat up but still shiny metal lighters, you know, those old kind that had the fluid in them, before not these old Bics and those kinds of things. As they leaned on one of my grandpa's cars in his backyard, they'd occasionally pull out some tools and tinker on one of the cars. These were men who needed to grab some semblance of self-reliance wherever they could get it. And fixing your own car was an example of that. On some very early Saturday mornings, Mr. John would pick Grandpa up and take him fishing, or they would go fishing. On other occasions, Grandpa would drive up to Mr. John's house and he would do the driving to the fishing sites. My grandfather grew up at a time and place where many Blacks felt it was good to have a white man on your side. And so I'm certain my grandfather probably felt some sense of or release of stress or less stress as he drove in rural Indiana along with a white man. And that's just the way they grew up. The two never went into each other's houses, but they didn't have to. Both men were migrants from rural Tennessee. My grandfather arrived from Henry County in 1953. I'm not sure about Mr. John, but I know he was from Tennessee. Both men grew up versed in what novelist Richard Wright termed the ethics of living Jim Crow. Certain behaviors and racial interaction behaviors during the Jim Crow era. Nevertheless, their fishing partnership in some way reflected changing attitudes and greater access to Indiana's natural world spaces in the post-civil rights era. While my grandfather certainly enjoyed his friendship with Mr. John, most of his fishing buddies were Black. Like him, most were migrants from the South who brought with them customs, brought with them connections to fishing and other natural world activities. Pay lakes were new to most of them. Highway Springs and Mount Pleasant were my grandfather and his friends' favorite pay lakes. Highway Springs is near Mount Auburn in Wayne County and opened in 1950. Located in Delaware County, Mount Pleasant was another spot that was enjoyed by Black fishermen in that part of the state. Fishermen mainly caught channel, catfish, and carp at those two water bodies. And I believe, I think I have an image of Mount Pleasant, one of them. Yeah, that's Highway Springs actually, and as you can see, it has 4 different lakes there, and you could go from one to the other depending on your success in fishing that day. People I've interviewed for my research compared pay lake and community space fishing. What I mean by community space fishing is rivers, streams, lakes, those kinds of things, right? Those who gravitated towards pay lakes cited the fact that they were far more likely to make catches than in community spaces or community waters. Pay lakes were stocked and you had to pay a fee to enter. So you're gonna get some fish, and that was the whole purpose. These men and women needed to make their fishing excursions an efficient one. Even acquiring bait involved a slice of self-reliance and efficiency. My grandfather would water the grass, for instance, at dusk sometimes. Later at night, my brother and sister and I would go out, and you all know what I did, catch earthworms. You know, the long, slender ones, as well as the fat, juicy ones. And we put them in a bottle with dirt and give them to grandpa, and we'd use them to go fishing. Others found that shore fishing was more, or rather natural world or community fishing was better, because if you didn't catch something in one spot or the fish weren't biting, you could go to an entirely different space. Here, you could go to a different space, but it's still kind of confining. If you go on a river, you can go up and down the river as much as you like. And so there was a certain freedom to that commercial, or rather community space fishermen enjoy. One questionnaire also responded or noted that in community spaces, or rather they would cook breakfast at these spaces. Bring out all the breakfast, and family would engage in the breakfast while the men and women were cooking, the kids would run around, etc. You could do this at a pay lake, but as you can see, it was a lot more restrictive, and some people wouldn't care for you with doing that engaging that kind of activity, making all that noise, etc., scaring the fish away, as if I don't know how that part worked, but my grandfather would always say, "Be quiet, you would scare the fish," and that was, okay, you the man, I'm going with that. But community space fishing was far more agreeable to these kind of family gatherings while fishing. One respondent even highlighted the difference between fishing on shore and boat fishing. You know, Conley, he said, in a boat, you don't have to worry that much about getting caught in the weeds and stuff like that. When you fish on the shore, you're fighting against the weeds. But if you're on a boat out on the lake, you're pulling against or away from those weeds. And I got that, but I also said, but when you find that you're caught in a certain area, you're not going to stay there, you're going to move, right? And so that moving around strengthens your interaction with the natural world, your engagement with the natural world. You're trying to find a spot that's more agreeable with what you're trying to do. And my man agreed with me to some point, but he stayed with his idea of the boat fishing being a little bit better. My grandfather and other Black fishermen also angled in community natural world water bodies around Muncie. The White River coursed just behind our neighborhood and formed the southern boundary of Whiteley, one of the two predominantly Black communities in the city. White River was where many Black kids learned how to fish. It was free, you could walk there, and when you got tired of it, you could simply cross the street and go to the park. And your grandparents were probably glad that you left by that time. But that's where most of us got our introduction into fishing and hunting for crawdads and stuff like that. And I think I have an image of some young girls there hunting for crawdads or crayfish along the canal in around 1950 here in Indianapolis. I took my stepdaughter crawdad hunting one day, and she just loved it. And now she eats them too. So we go to the all-you-can-eat buffets, and she just gobbles them all up. She loves it. Okay. Just about done. African Americans also travel for fishing at the popular Prairie Creek Reservoir, part of Muncie's public park system, and located just at the city's outskirts. Crappie and bluegill were prevalent here. Another popular natural world water body where Black Munsonians fished during the mid-20th century was Phillips Lake. Phillips Lake began as a quarry and was located near several foundries and other metalworking plants. African Americans before the mid-1950s used it as a swimming and fishing site. The city's only swimming pool, Tui's, was segregated until Roy C. Bewling led a protest to desegregate the space in 1956. The lake, Phillips Lake, sat near a set of railroad tracks. And that adds to the mystery of the water body. We can get back to that one. Yeah, there's Phillips Lake. And the African American community there to the right. It looks like it's there. Remnants of railroad tracks. And my mother said when she came up here in the 50s, well, my grandfather even told me this as well. They heard a story of a long time ago in the early 1900s, like 19-teens, a train was going across the tracks, fell into this water, derailed, and fell into the water body. And the water body is so deep that they never found the train. It just kept going all the way to Davy Jones's locker. And so I think it had more to do with keeping us away, from this space, no lifeguards or anything like that. I think one young man died there from drowning in the 60s. So it was a off-limits space. It worked for me. I never touched it. But I did sneak in with some friends one day and look at it, and the water was just, it was remarkable. It was calm, green, it was beautiful. The Muncie Police Department now uses it as a scuba diving training site. I think it's about 55 feet deep. So, it had some depth to it. And so that was another space that people who live just in that area to the right would fish in and swim in from time to time. African Americans in Indianapolis fished all over the place. Prior to the proliferation of pay lakes in the 1950s, most angled along White River and the canal. A longtime fisherman and native of the city's east side, our friend from Dirty Dozen Hunting Fishing Club, recollected that it was not uncommon at these times to see a guy strolling down the Indiana Avenue area with a pole on his shoulder, strung with a half dozen different kinds of fish coming from the canal or White River, taking them home for preparation for consumption. This clearly was an example of what Southern sportsmen in the early New South called pot fishing, and in a way that in a disparaging way, elite white sportsmen would criticize poor Black hunters and poor white hunters by saying, you guys just fish to eat, or you hunted to eat. We fish and hunt for sport. No, we display our stuff. We have certain rules and etiquette that we follow as we go through the hunting. And part of this also included making sure that a Negro was with the hunting troop to add an aura of originality to the plantation South when slaves went with the masters on the coon hunt and that kind of thing. And some guys made their living operating in this space. They would go with these sporting clubs and do different things, show them where the good sites were and different tasks around the campsite. Amazing. We mentioned they were fishing all over the county, around all over Indiana, the pop fishing, etc. Others traveled outside of the city for fishing at Lieber's State Recreational Area near Cloverdale. One respondent mentioned that Lieber Park was a favorite of her family. We bring everybody, she recalled, and added that they often cook breakfast out there during their outing. We'd all have a great time. The kids, everybody. But not everybody enjoyed fishing and other natural world interactions. A few respondents to my questionnaire expressed no pleasure in these activities. Their reasons were universal. Why? One middle-aged woman replied, why would I go out with bugs and animals? That's their world, not mine, and I'm not intruding on it. And I don't want them intruding on mine. A male senior citizen commented, I can go to the store. I used to go with my grandfather and brothers, and I hated it. Didn't like anything, didn't like nothing about it. Still don't. So, as we talk about this, it's important for us to remember that everybody enjoys being outside, right? And then lastly, the Boys Club, also known as the Boys and Girls Club today of America. The Young Men's Christian Association, used to be known as the YMCA and now known as the Y. And the Boy Scouts of America, now known as Scouting USA, also offer African-American youth opportunities for fishing and other outworld or natural world interactions. Last one. I'm out of line, out of sequence here, but this is the last one. Oh, snappers. We're almost there. Oh, it's on the back. The Boys Club took kids to Camp Adventure in Delaware County and Camp Red Wing. YMCA kids went to Camp Crossley in northern Indiana. And the Scouts were everywhere. Turkey Run, Salamone Lake, Randsburg State Park, you name it. And everywhere in between. All offered wonderful opportunities for introducing African-American youth to various aspects of the natural world in Indiana. In conclusion, I've tried to touch on some aspects of the intersection between African-American Hoosiers and the natural world in the 20th century. We noted some of the intersections, antecedents in Africa, the slave era, and early Black settlements in Indiana. We also highlighted the Great Migration's role in transferring particular cultural expressions from the rural South to the urban North during the 20th century. We touched upon discrimination and sometimes hostile features of Indiana society. And we concluded with some highlights from the questionnaire responses I've received thus far in my research. My hope is that we have a greater appreciation for this aspect of African-American history in our state. And this aspect of the group's history underscores a spirit of resistance and optimism, vital to all working people, working class people. It underscores a spirit of resistance against dehumanizing industrial manual labor, against often cramped domestic conditions, against food insecurity, against familial and cultural erosion. And I'll be happy to take any questions or comments you have now. That's it. Need a glass of water. And I think we had a question in the back. Do we need the microphone or you can project?
Are there still any predominantly African American communities, recreational communities around lakes like there used to be?
Oh, yes. Does anybody know of any of those that visited before I go into it? Well, we know of Idlewild is still around. Chickabone in Atlantic City is still around. Fox Lake is still around. I believe there are some around in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, they still play a role, but as I'm sure you can imagine, they started, in many cases, they started to decline in popularity as a result of desegregation, you know. But you know, they still play an important role for many people. I believe we have some people who represent Fox Lake up front, if I'm not mistaken. And can you speak to that topic, if you don't mind?
Yeah, there are several possibly probably one of the first ones in Indiana.
I believe it was the first one in Indiana.
Yeah, and then there's this pile up in Michigan.
Mhm.
It's quite developed. Matter of fact, the group from Fox Lake took a trip. Kevin organized a trip and went up to Idlewild. First time for me. But it's amazing. It developed almost exactly the same way as Fox Lake developed.
How do you mean by that?
The original buyers of the land from Fort Wayne, like you mentioned, bought the land and was hoping to develop it as a recreational facility.
Mhm.
The city of Angola turned them down.
Mhm.
The story that I heard from my parents, who are one of the buyers, was this.
I'm going to go with your story.
Mhm.
I'm going to go with your story.
Okay, probably true, that they wanted to make a resort, couldn't do it. The city of Angola said no, so that killed it.
Mhm.
They said, all right, we'll fix you. You know who we gonna sell it to.
Mhm.
And so they did. That's exactly what it is. My parents were one of the buyers of those lots and
And your name,
houses.
sir, if I may ask?
Terrain is my last name. Colbert is his last name.
There's a terrain family in Months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Glenda
Glenda
Terrain, the
Terrain.
basketball player.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Small world.
Just distant cousin.
Okay, very good.
Same trip, different boat.
Okay. Okay.
But my parents bought the land, and we spent a lot of our childhood up there. One of the things that I was amazed at was how freeing it was to go to Fox Lake. We went there every summer. We spent a lot of the time of our summers up there. You could go. Mother would tell us when we left one of those houses that was shipped from Fort Wayne.
Mhm.
Just like that Ransom House or similar to it.
Mhm.
I don't want to see you anymore until dinner time.
Be outside.
Be outside, get gone,
Right.
Don't call me unless you break your leg. And that's the way it was. It was free. You couldn't do that here in Indianapolis where I was raised.
Sure.
But that's how freeing it was to go. We had a wonderful time, learned a lot of lessons, caught a lot of crawdads, caught a lot of little fish. And mother would
Little fish.
little fish. Mother would cook this mess of fish up for the breakfast next day, and there we are. But it was a great place to be, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Thank you so much for those recollections, and those are the kinds of things I'm trying to capture. Not a lot of work has been done on this subject, right? But what is interesting is one of the myriad effects of the pandemic and the lockdown has been a proliferation of African-American engagement in the natural world. For instance, the PBS channel has a series that's hosted by Tunde Thurston, which deals with, he's an African-American host of an outdoors program that goes around the country, interviewing different people and their interactions with the natural world and the outdoor world. One of his programs featured a young African-American woman who's a rock climber. And she talked about her experiences in that sport, both the good and the not so good. A lot of sexism in that sport, as I'm sure you can possibly imagine. So it's been an enormous explosion. Bicycle riding. Look, I go up and down the Monon Trail every day, just about every day. And I noticed today for some reason, well, I didn't see it yesterday because I was working on this, but I noticed today that now there are signs posted along the Monon Trail that declare that motorized vehicles are no longer allowed, motorized bicycles are no longer allowed on the trail. And they've been zooming up and down those motorized bicycles, e-bikes and stuff, zooming up and down the trail all summer. And I guess the wrong person must have gotten hit. You know, I could get hit, but all it takes is the wrong person to get hit. And oh my God, it's an epidemic, right? And so we got to change this. And so I guess that happened. And so, yeah, that change has happened. So, and again, thank you so much for your recollections. Any other questions? Anybody ever been fishing here? Where'd you fish, if I may ask? One spot in Indiana. Okay. For my next performance, I'll pull a rabbit out of my head. Okay. Yes, sir. Eagle Creek also? Eagle Creek as well? You fish at Eagle Creek? Mm-hmm. Any others? White River? Okay. Another thing I found interesting thus far, the canal, certainly. A friend of mine showed me a photograph, unfortunately I don't have it with me today, of a young man, a friend of her family's, who recently caught a catfish. Oh, it was like this, about like that, from somewhere by Broad Ripple. And he's not heads. It's like it's his honey spot or his safe spot. He didn't tell her where it was. And you see these kinds of podcasts and YouTube videos in proliferation as well. I looked at one of a guy in Mississippi, and the whole YouTube video is him standing on this pier and just tossing in his line and pulling out catfish this big. Boom, 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 just on and on and on. And I got a big one now. It was incredible. But it shows this increasing interest in the outdoors, and not just the interest, but documenting that interest. That's the thing, isn't it? Recording it, taking photographs of it that researchers can use in retelling the story.
You know, Anthony, you were talking about this program on PBS, and I remember seeing one about, I think it's Sag Harbor.
Yes, that's another one.
The Sag Harbor,
Yeah,
and then East Coast, and then Martha's Vineyard.
Yes.
Again, another area where Blacks recreated and enjoyed nature and so forth. These communities are around different areas, of course, with water.
Right. And those spaces were highlighted in Lewis Graham's Member of Our Kind of People. Someone might be familiar with that text. Came out a couple of decades ago. Was talked about that slice of African American culture. Any others? Sure.
You mentioned that not very many people recognize the name Fox Lake.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
What percentage knew about it as opposed to didn't know about it? Do you remember?
Just off the top, I would say at least half knew. But I was thinking, since I was passionate about it, everybody ought to be passionate about it, right? Don't you share my passion, right? So I was a little surprised when someone would say, yeah, I heard of it, but I never went. And I knew these people fished, and camped and that kind of thing. And still others were like, I never heard of it. Those tend to be younger, I'd say 40s and that kind of age group.
Well, now we can do it.
Right, and that's the point as well. That's it. Yep.
Back in those days.
And do you have any recollections, just to sum up, about driving up there?
Driving, oh yeah.
There.
I had a cousin who wrecked a car. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember the green book?
Yes.
My parents had a green book. And we drive it from Indianapolis to Fox Lake, and we go through these little towns, Auburn, all those little small bird, Muncie. And there were places you could stop, places you couldn't stop.
Right.
And we had to change the route. We used to go Highway 1, same way.
Highway 1, that's
On the eastern border, north-south
okay.
of Indiana.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the way we used to get up there. As a matter of fact, as a child sitting in the car, you know, your parents, we would always, my brother and I would always be saying, "Are we there yet?
Yes.
Are we there yet?" And
What kind of car did you drive, my man? What kind of car did you guys drive?
it was a 1950 Dodge Meadowbrook. It was green. That's all I remember. That's one of those deals.
Yeah, I have something to say about that.
Okay. But Kevin has a picture in his phone just now that he took of a tower, a radio tower. It's part of the radio system. And when they did transcontinental radio broadcasting across the United States, New York to California, this was one of the towers that
Really?
yeah, it's right there at Fox Lake.
I did not know that.
And my mother made up this game, of course, to keep these boys quiet. The first one who sees the tower gets something when we get there. And to this day, when I drive to Detroit or drive up north, get north of Fort Wayne, I started looking in
That landmark is there.
looking for the tower.
That's beautiful. I love that story. I mentioned about the car because Gretchen Soren's book, Driving While Black, talks about African Americans' connection to the automobile in the 20th century and how, certain stereotypes emerge around cars in the group. And one of those, of course, was a Cadillac and luxury cars. Well, we have to keep in mind, she points out that for years, African Americans were denied home loans, right? Cars was the next thing we could buy that reflected a certain kind of us. And on top of that, we wanted something that would get to Fox Lake and back, right? To Pickford, Mississippi and back. We couldn't afford to have it falling apart along the way. So we bought big, powerful cars. It had nothing to do with, or very little to do with, showing something off. We needed something that would get us from point A to point B at a fast time, if necessary. My uncle tells a story, and I end with this. He went to this white guy's farm looking for some hunting dogs once. My sister, the tomboy, was with him along with my uncle, his younger brother. And they drove up to the guy's farm way out, and you can't get there from here in Indiana. And my uncle got out of the car, and as he walked away, he told his brother, "Now listen, I want you to turn this car around and have it facing this way, going out, because I don't know what it's going to be like when I come out." So he was perfectly aware of, even though this guy might sell him a hound dog to hunt, something else might happen, and we need to hit the gas. And so she points out, that's one of the reasons why so many African Americans bought big, powerful cars, because, we needed something reliable to do what we did, right? Okay. All right.
Well, I think this has really been interesting and engaging. I appreciate you all coming out. Before you leave, scan this code and just complete the short questionnaire. Help us out, give us your thoughts, and it'll also appear on the screen at some point.
Uh-oh.
I don't know why you want to keep showing that.
All right, I'm sorry. You can't keep it up here. That's 2 weeks pool in Muncie, Indiana. As you can see, there are no Negroes.
Okay. So, all right, again.
Yeah. So I'm good. I think that's all of the images that.
Visit our
Ms. Joe.
website, support Freetown Village. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And
Big fish there. All right, that's it.